Veni Sancte Spiritus, come, Holy Spirit.
Power of prayer. Facing threats to religious freedom, Catholic leaders convene for a prayer breakfast. Pressure to act. Pro-lifers want Congress to move now on a 20-week abortion ban bill. Genocide remembered. Armenia's foreign minister is in Washington commemorating a dark anniversary. And faith through sports. Pope Francis talks with Italian sporting clubs about growing in virtue. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, May 7th, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. Catholic government, clergy, and lay leaders pray here in Washington for the future of our nation. This morning's National Catholic Prayer Breakfast focused on threats to religious freedom. Wyatt Goolsbee was there, and he joins us now from Capitol Hill tonight.
Brian, when it comes to the topic of prayer, Catholics agree the issue is bipartisan. For over a decade, the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast has invited political as well as church leaders to talk about the importance of prayer in the life of the nation. Joining in prayer this morning, a variety of priests, nuns, and lay people. The National Catholic Prayer Breakfast was created in 2004 in response to St. John Paul II's call for a new evangelization.
Jesus is the answer to our deepest longings and desires. Jesus is and always will be the answer to the problems of the world.
Buffalo's Bishop Richard Malone was one of two keynote speakers today, the other, Texas Governor Greg Abbott.
I asked for God's strength, and He responded by giving me challenges that made me stronger.
Abbott says he leaned on prayer after a jogging accident in Houston 3 decades ago left him paralyzed from the waist down. A tree limb crushed his spine and damaged his kidneys. He will never walk again.
It was a multi-year process, and through that I grew closer to my connection with God and felt a greater presence of Him in my life. And it's a presence that has been a guiding force for me ever since then.
Abbott says whenever he prays, he feels a greater sense of calm and direction in his life. He has challenges, but he says the presence of God gives him plenty of strength. For Abbott, that means supporting religious liberty. As Texas governor and former attorney general, he's fought against the HHS mandate and efforts to remove the 10 Commandments from government buildings.
I fight for it in part because it is the right thing to do with regard to the values that are the right values for us as a country. But I also fight for it because it's a fundamental constitutional principle that's been a guidepost for this nation from its very beginning.
Religious liberty was brought up a lot during this morning's prayer breakfast, not just by Governor Abbott. Today, our country also marks National Prayer Day. In Washington, Wyatt Goolsbee, EWTN News Nightly.
Now, some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Pro-life activists stormed the Capitol again today. They continue to pressure congressional leadership to act on a bill to ban abortion after 20 weeks of pregnancy. Suzanne LaFranchi reports.
It was not so much a betrayal.
Undaunted, pro-life leaders hold a second peaceful protest, cradling life-size models of unborn babies. They are demanding Congress vote on the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act.
Roe v. Wade has got to go.
During the annual March for Life, the House was to vote on the 20-week ban. Disagreement over a rape exception canceled the vote. Protester Lori Hoy was conceived through rape.
I didn't have a choice how I got here, but obviously God wanted me to be here, and that's why I'm here today, to stand up for those babies like me who are not allowed the chance to live.
Cheryl Conrad says her abortion was devastating.
It was what destroyed and my son. So it's brings in the end of a child's life, and it's murder.
8 pro-lifers were arrested last March at a similar protest. Today, the pro-life leaders returned to John Boehner's office. Their knocks went unanswered. The pro-life leaders say while getting the 20-week abortion ban through Congress is important, perhaps more critical is the 2016 presidential election.
We need to register, we need to vote, and we need to engage.
Next week marks the second anniversary of first-degree murder conviction of abortionist Kermit Gosnell. Pro-lifers say that propelled this bill.
This is historic legislation, and we see it as sort of following the similar trajectory of the partial birth abortion ban.
Pro-life leaders warn if Congress doesn't act, they'll be back next month. At the Capitol, Suzanne LaFranchi, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Suzanne. And the Senate passes a bipartisan bill giving Congress a chance to review and possibly reject any final nuclear deal with Iran. The vote 98-1.
Today, we're one step closer to getting this bill done, and I believe we're closer to being able to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear weapon state.
The legislation would stop President Obama from waiving sanctions against Iran for at least 30 days while lawmakers review a deal. The House is expected to vote on the measure next week. A federal appeals court rules the bulk collection of Americans' phone records by the government is illegal. The judges say the case illustrates the complexity of balancing privacy interests with the nation's security. Courts have been back and forth on this issue, citing a debate in Congress that could profoundly alter the legal landscape. At least 12 people are hurt after suspected twisters sweep across the southern plains. 51 tornadoes were reported in Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. This storm is in Kansas. The storm forecasters expect this threat of severe weather to continue into the weekend. Amid the tornado damage, high water is a problem. Storms that moved through the area yesterday produced 5 to 8 inches of rain. Today's election in Great Britain is too close to call. Polls put Prime Minister David Cameron's Conservatives and Ed Miliband's Labour Party in a dead heat. Neither looks able to win a clear majority of Parliament, 650 seats. Northern Ireland's First Minister cast his vote, calling the election a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
I've been in politics for 40 years now, as the grey hair would tell you, and I've never had an election where things are so finely balanced in the House of Commons, where Northern Ireland votes could mean so much.
If no party wins outright, it could take days, even weeks of negotiation to forge a workable government for the UK. Pope Francis tells Christian leaders in Europe that their churches have a duty to welcome migrants. Italy is at the center of this crisis. The Italian Coast Guard just yesterday rescued 90 more migrants in a rubber dinghy off the coast of Libya. Italian authorities and aid workers, many from the church, say mild weather and calm seas could lead to spikes in these arrivals. The relentless flood of migrants this year is on track to surpass the 170,000 rescued at sea by Italy in 2014. Pope Francis meets with members of Rome's sports club Lazio, most famous for its football or soccer team. The Pope reminded them the human person exists in spirit and body. He encouraged them to cultivate both of these aspects in sports, not forgetting the spiritual dimension. He warned them not to let practice and games come before Sunday Mass. Lazio is a sports club founded in 1900 to provide access to sports for all levels of society. Joining us from Rome, Richard Rouse, an official with the Pontifical Council for Culture's Office of Sport and Culture. And Richard, this Pope from Argentina is a soccer fan, and he's welcomed soccer teams before. How is this helping you do the work you do?
Oh, it was a great event today. It wasn't just soccer, it was all of sports. It was rugby, it was tennis, it was ski. The room was so full of thousands and thousands of kids, grandparents and athletes, and it just gives us a great boost to know that behind all the work these guys are doing, management, everyone on a weekday and engaged in the oratories, that the Pope's behind them, that he encourages it and supports it. It's a real good feeling for us.
So cricket is not quite as popular as soccer around the world, but you're a founding member of the St. Peter's cricket team. Tell us about some of the players that you have on that team.
The St. Peter's Cricket Club is a club just of seminarians here based in Rome. There's a few priests from the Curia as well, just to give them a hand. And it's set up to help them establish a good relationship with sport, so that priests know that part of their daily experience can be sport. They can go to sport, they can play their sport, they can learn to exercise, they can make friends with people, and then take all of that experience and take it back into the chapel as well.
I think of St. John Bosco from Turin, and Pope Francis is the same way in a sense. reaching out to especially young men where they are. And let's face it, men are in sports. Talk a little bit about the link between faith and sports and how it can be an effective way to evangelize through sport.
You know, the joys, the hopes, the fears, the anxieties of every man and child, every woman, is what the church shares, especially the poorest. Now, that's what our faith is all about, being where the people are at. We want to be there. We want to ensure the church can be there. If the world today is concentrated around sport, then the church needs to be there too. Just like St. John Bosco, just like the Salesians, we need to make sure that the oratory, this place where sport is right next to the chapel, is part of our daily existence. That's what we're doing, faith and sport. We can go and look at the scriptures as well, fight the good fight. We can hear echoes as well of all of that really strong Pauline teaching to make the very most of all that you're doing, the best you can. Persevere in your faith. All of this athletic language is great, and it appeals to young people so much. The hall this morning was full of people cheering with enthusiasm, not just for the Pope, but for what he was saying. He was saying, do your best, and go to church as well. And they loved it. They were lapping it up this morning.
Well, you carry that enthusiasm as well. Richard Rouse, thanks for joining us from Rome tonight. We appreciate you.
Lovely to see you.
And you too. Coming up, the Armenian foreign minister remembers 100 years since Ottoman Turks began a genocide against Armenian Christians. And German powers finally surrendered to Allied forces in Europe 70 years ago today. Will you join us today in praying for an end to abortion on this National Day of Prayer? That's a message from the March for Life today. Thanks for joining us on this Thursday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Thousands of Armenian Americans are here in Washington for services marking the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide. Jason Calvi joins us now with that report.
Brian, the U.S. government does not recognize as genocide the deaths of up to 1.5 million Armenians during World War I. Pope Francis, on the other hand, recently called it the first genocide of the 20th century. That's a view widely shared by scholars. Today I had the chance to talk to Armenia's foreign minister, who's meeting with congressional and State Department leaders. Edward Nalbandian praises Pope Francis and the 24 countries around the world that classify the massacre as a genocide. He says he hopes the U.S. government will do the same. Turkey denies the deaths were genocide and accuses the Holy Father of spreading hatred. Armenia's foreign minister tells me the Pope's words are important.
This was an important and very strong statement, which was a message of solidarity with the Armenian people, but at the same time, a very strong and important message to the international community.
Armenians living in the United States are pushing for a formal vote in Congress that would classify the killings as genocide. That has not happened yet. The president of Armenia and Vice President Biden tonight are joining faith leaders for an ecumenical service in honor of the Armenian genocide victims. The memorials continue with a concert tomorrow and a divine liturgy Saturday at the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. Brian?
A beautiful and fitting setting. Thank you, Jason. 70 years ago this week, Nazi Germany officially surrendered to Allied forces, bringing an end to nearly 6 years of war in Europe.
The British royal family appeared on the balcony, and the people below were the people of Britain, a people who for 5.5 long years had suffered under the bombs and guns of Nazi Germany.
As word of Germany's surrender spread, celebrations broke out in London near Buckingham Palace. There and around the world, people marked victory in Europe with street parties, dancing and singing. At London's Imperial War Museum, an exhibit called Fashion on the Ration today gives a sense of what life was like on the home front.
VE Day is a really kind of interesting moment of transition. It is the first moment as people look ahead to a lifetime in peacetime. Now, remember, we've got children who've been born in the war who've never lived in anything other than wartime. People now look ahead to a life beyond fighting.
May 8, 1945 became known as VE Day for victory in Europe, but the war in the Pacific against Japan lasted well into the summer of 1945. Well, some seniors find new independence through digital technology, but as Catherine Zeltner reports, it comes at a cost to their privacy.
Whenever Bill and Dorothy Dworsky pick up their pillboxes, open the refrigerator, open the oven, or move the bathroom door, A wireless sensor detects the motion and sends the data to a digital logbook. Their activities can be tracked on a computer or smartphone. And if there's a break in routine, family members get a text or email alert.
It lets me know if I need to send help or if I need to get over there, absolutely, yeah. And if I need to check in.
Dorothy Dworsky also wears a watch with an emergency call button. It's all part of a system called Lively that helps the couple live independently and stay in their own home.
We don't want to be in a home for the elderly because we don't feel like we are elderly.
The system offers peace of mind to their son Phil, who lives across town and travels frequently for work.
We don't have to worry about him worrying about us.
Lively is sold by a San Francisco company that charges a monthly fee for the service. It's one of a growing number of tech startups developing new products to serve seniors.
And we just felt like there was a great opportunity to reimagine and reinvent this category.
It was the Looney. The Institute on Aging has been helping entrepreneurs test products like Lively to understand how technology can and can't help the elderly.
It doesn't replace the contact that you have with the client, right? It can't replace the fact that you take them out for dinner or you take them out for lunch.
I think sensors actually have great potential in helping older adults stay independent and at home for longer periods of time, but there are challenges with these sensors, especially in terms of their potential intrusion of privacy.
For the Dworskys, it's worth trading a little privacy for more independence. Catherine Seltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Up next, once an outspoken atheist, now a devoted Catholic, Leah Libresco releases a book on her unlikely journey. And in this year of consecrated life, we visit these unique followers of St. Francis. Lovely lady dressed in blue, teach me how to pray. God was just your little boy. Tell me what to say. I remember that from my childhood, part of a poem prayer dedicated to Our Lady as we continue celebrating Mary during this beautiful month of May. Thanks for joining us on Thursday evening, May 7th. I'm Brian Patrick. Leah Libresco's new book, Arriving at Amen, is released today. It is her story, the atheist who converts to Catholicism. So, Leah, your first major interaction with Christianity came at Yale. What was your first impression?
Well, it was mostly that the impressions of the Christians I were meeting were much more complex than I knew. I thought of Christianity as being kind of a SOP, a way that people solve problems that were properly solved by science. And my friends weren't discussing science, they were discussing ethics and how do we know the true and the good.
You remind me a little of my daughters. Brilliant. They're brilliant. You think, you analyze, you're a mathematician. What was it like learning to pray for the first time? Honestly, just giving it to God.
It was hard for me because
I'd
been studying Christianity, right? So I'd been looking at God as an idea that I could kind of examine and unfold and not as a person at all. So it was hard for me because even when I'd pray, I'd kind of drift back into the completely analytic thinking about God rather than thinking with God. And I had to keep kind of offering whatever I was thinking just over to God instead.
How long did that take you to get from the head to the heart?
I'll let you know when it finishes.
When you finish. Okay, so you are, as I said, a mathematician, and you connect that with Mass. I want to read from a subtitle called A Scary Sacrament. You say, as I sought to expand my knowledge, I couldn't help but be drawn into all the nerdy logistical details related to the Eucharist. Expand on that just a little bit.
Well, I'd be watching at the Mass, and since I didn't really understand what was at the heart of it, I tried to build up my understanding from everything around it. You know, why do these two prayers bracket kind of the sacrifice of the Mass? What's the meaning of the priest's vestments? So I kind of couldn't look at the center, but I could look and build up an understanding from all the tiny details moving around the center.
So where have you come since then?
Well, a lot of the work for me is finding a way just to cultivate more love and joy in my day-to-day life, to kind of take any of the intellectual moments of beauty that I have and let that be fuel for the way I interact with other people personally or with God personally. And sometimes what I do is just even, sharing those moments of joy, like I try and do in the book or even in life, that we're surrounded by beauty, and a lot of it is weird beauty.
Oh, yes.
And then just to
Lovely,
offer
weird
that
beauty.
and have a moment of communion and looking at the same beautiful, strange thing.
I have to confess that sometimes I thank God that I'm not an intellect like you, because it's not so hard for me just to submit to the mystery of the Mass. Have you been able to accomplish that? Or as you say, you're on the journey, but do you sense that every once in a while where you can just say, okay, this is what it is?
Well, I think there's kind of a thing that happens when you're looking at things from an intellectual standpoint where you can be dazzled by scale because you're trying to go as deeply into it as possible. Like a mathematician who's trying to understand a 13-dimensional object. You never hold the whole thing in your head at once.
No
you
way.
look at small slices and you understand a little more about it every time you add on, still without ever holding the whole thing in your mind at once. And I kind of understand the saints in the same way. I look at small slices of the goodness of God in these individual lives, and I don't hold God himself in my head all at once, but I can see it reflected in small bits in all these holy lives.
You had some following as an atheist blogger. How have people reacted to your conversion?
Well, it's varied a lot based on how well they knew me. People who kind of just heard a Catholic, someone became Catholic, tended to be a little more annoyed. A lot of the people who had known me for a long time, who were atheists, who are still atheists, thought that I had found what was for me a serious philosophical problem, and they respected kind of my commitment to truth in following it to its logical conclusions. They just thought I'd made a mistake like 6 steps farther back in the proof, right?
Well, this is an intriguing book, just a little bit that I've seen. I can't wait to read the whole thing. Leah Libresco's Arriving at Amen, 7 Catholic prayers that even I can offer. I love that. Thank you so much for joining us. And keep sharing your story. It's very powerful.
Thank you.
All right. Well, a Chinese province removes hundreds of rooftop crosses from Catholic and Protestant churches. It's been seen as an effort to ban religious symbols identifying sanctuaries. If a draft of a government order is approved, Zhejiang province authorities would have legal grounds for removing rooftop crosses. The government says the crosses violate building codes. Critics argue the rapid growth of Christianity makes the ruling Communist Party very nervous. Since early last year, officials have taken crosses from more than 400 churches, sometimes resulting in violent resistance. Well, celebrating the year of consecrated life declared by Pope Francis, St. Francis still has genuine followers. Mark Irons visits this joyful religious family, true sons of Francis of Assisi.
The sandals, the long brown robes, the pointy hoods. Are they monks?
Monks typically do not leave where they live. I'm not a monk, I'm a friar. And friars have, as part of our charism, a desire to be out and among the people. Good afternoon.
Brother Andrew McCarty is a Franciscan in his 4th year of formation. His order strives to follow the teachings of a famous 13th century saint.
We're sons of St. Francis of Assisi, who gave himself completely for love of Christ, and we try to do that.
300 years after the time of Francis, some Franciscans felt they needed reform.
I think as the order grew, they started to lose their connection with the poor.
Now they're known as the Capuchins.
Capuchin just means hood. It's Italian. Capuche is Italian for hood.
But it's not just their hoods that make them stand out. Capuchins place a strong emphasis on contemplative prayer and serving people on the fringes of society.
You'll find us with people that our culture sort of shuns.
Since the 1700s, a Capuchin has served as the Pope's preacher, and the order has seen its share of holy men. 15 Capuchins have been canonized by the Church, and the most famous, Padre Pio. Striving to be saints themselves, the brothers rely on one another.
As a family, as a true fraternity.
And more important than the rosary or sandals is the smile, they say.
We were created to be joyful. Jesus wants us to be joyful.
At the Capuchin College in Washington, Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
Yes, that is Mark. Mark Irons, thank you so much. We're glad that you came back. But what a beautiful visit and good story. And we thank you for watching tonight. Until tomorrow, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch again on EWTN's YouTube page. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, my dear family, I just thank you. I'm Brian Patrick. Good night, and may God bless you.